Mr. Hammond? Mr. Hammond? Marco? Can you see me or hear me or anything? I'm not on the TV. Hey, who's the federal magistrate in Gordon Gallagher? He asked me to mention there's another judge going up to senior status, so he wanted me to say how much I like him, but I think I don't need to keep repeating that to you, so whatever you decide is best. Yeah, I know, but I just wanted to, he asked me to. Yeah, thank you so much. So my plan for tonight is, I guess we'll have a vote if they say, and I understand if I can't participate, I'll just watch, okay? I know, I imagine they will, but you never know. Test.
Okay, well, we could be the work session. You guys want to reintroduce yourselves, and I think that covers everybody.
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Keith Wolzak. I'm with Cushing Terrell, out of Dark Denver office.
Yep, Dave Dixon, also from Cushing Terrell, service planner out of the Denver shop.
I think you met everybody, but Charlie Willen, Mayor Pro Tem, the mayor will be here shortly, get talk traffic. Jim, I think you know, Marshall, would you know, if you showed up. I think there's all the questions.
Great.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Take it. We have one other colleague, Heather Henry, who's going to zoom in, and I don't know how we'll know if she's on board.
Alyssa will.
Yeah.
Oh,
Bring back, so.
So, okay. So just to start out, Heather Henry's with Connect One Design based out of it's both Aspen and Dissolve. And Heather's team is on board for engagement effort for the coffee process. And so hopefully she'll join us and she can give us an update on some of the events that are coming.
We have Tony Hershey, the council member, he's on as well.
Okay.
You can't see him, I can see his guy.
All right.
Yeah. He's not well today, so he basically. Hey, so.
Good.
Thank you, Tony.
Could I also be promoted to panelist? So
Heather's
whoever's in charge of the Zoom. Oh, yeah, that should be Dave Dixon.
well, that's happening. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to meet you in person. It's been a really weird couple of years. What's going on in Europe? I'm not sure around the woods. Yeah, it's happening. So it's very nice to try to get back to some sense of normal. It's nice to meet you all. Thank you. We wanted to cover a couple of things on our agenda today. I don't know how much time we won't have for us, but we'll try to be as brief as we can, give you an update, and make sure that we talk to you.
So we have about an hour and a half scheduled, but we'd like to be absolutely not be able to question.
Yeah.
We got things like that. And I think everybody probably has read the white paper, so.
Good.
Okay.
So we'll just hit the highlights, about 10 to 15 minutes max.
That'd be very great. Okay.
So we want to, number one, give you an update on the comprehensive plan process so far. And our second agenda item, if you just go to the next slide. Thank you. The next agenda item, as you say, we reviewed the case studies of different communities throughout Colorado on some of our growth management strategies. And so we provided that white paper to you, and we want to talk about that today. And then the growth management strategies, you asked us through staff to talk at a high level. First, to accelerate the conversation about growth strategies for the city of Glenwood Springs, and then try to tie that back into a schedule as best as we can. So we've moved that forward as well. And so then in the last item, we did the next steps. So this chart, if you look at the very top, the light blue, we've got some basic phases that we had: kickoff, initiation phase in November, December, at the end of the year. And then going into the 1st of January, we started off with our project steering committee members meetings. That on the band, we have 8 steering committee meetings lined up. We've met with the steering committee twice, and we'll be meeting with them again next week for the 3rd time. So this graphic is showing you how we've laid out the plan process and what the topics are for each one of the steering committee meetings. January was pushed for a couple of different reasons, which was great because it allowed us to really define the case studies of the white paper that we put together for you, and then also get ready for the conversation that we had in February on this high-level discussion on growth and what the perceptions are about growth in the community and what some of the general preferences are in terms of where the community might go in terms of strategies. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. The red component is added to this chart because it came out of your discussions. Remember, of course, you all remember the moratorium discussion, and you asked us to look at those case studies. So what we did was we lined the red bar with some basic milestones, and it shows you in March next week when we're tying the schedule back together. Okay, and so I think that's important. And on the very bottom are the 3 main community events. We had our first community event, virtual event on February 9th. We have the next series of community events coming up on April 20th. And then we have not set the date for the 3rd and final community event, which will be later on in July. We have a draft. Each one of those
next one, possibly person, I see.
we will work with staff and we'll respond as we need to. Yeah, for sure. So Heather will talk a little bit more in detail about these events and what we've been hearing so far. This slide is just conceptually showing you on the very top band all these different inputs, information that we're getting. So what I want to emphasize is that we're still in an information gathering exploration phase. We're not developing draft policy by any means. We're not in the recommendation phase, and we're certainly not in the draft plan phase, but we're just really getting information from everybody in the community. And so we're doing that in different ways. Through talking with you, City Council. We've had the first event that we've talked about in February. We have lined up coming up very soon a series of focus group meetings that we're going to be doing. And those, I think, tentatively right now are scheduled to be virtual online, but we'll continue to work with staff to see if we can do those in person. We've been looking at the previous plan, the 2011 comp plan. We've been looking at your capital improvement program, the transportation master plan. All that information our team has been pulling together. So just to quickly back it up, in addition to Cushing Terrell and Heather, we have Farron Pierce, which is our transportation planning consultant. And we also have Leland Consulting, who's our marketing team. The next band you see that's labeled as phases. This is just the continuum that we typically go through. So as I say, we start with understanding your last plan. You all actually, before we came on board, did a fantastic effort on public survey information. So we've been taking that information and pulling it into this input process as well. We are developing, looking at your vision and goals, and we're going to suggest potential refinements in our next deliverable. And then, as I say, we're going to go through this recommendation implementation strategies and a first view of a draft and a final one. Each one of those milestones has a deliverable. So the only formal deliverable that we've provided yet at this point is the community engagement plan, and I suspect the white paper that we provided in the case studies. We're gonna take that existing condition summary memo that you see there and merge it with our recommendation implementation strategies. And the reason why we are going to do that is we're still in the process of gathering information. We haven't had the focus group discussions yet. We want to be able to get all that information and document that in the existing summaries of the memo as well. And then you can see comp plan update is a formal delivery plan with the final comp plan, which is going to be in August. After August, your adoption schedule. So that's a snapshot of the process so far.
Who are the focus groups?
We are still kind of in flux on what those focus groups are, but we typically suggest 7 separate focus groups. They could range from mobility to neighborhood groups to a technical focus group that's on land use regulations. It could be on environment, it could be on equity, social equity. So those 7 topics are being formed, and the individuals, there's typically 7 to 9 people who represent the community at large who are sitting and participating in those focus group meetings. And the idea is that you're getting people who are interested in, say, like mobility, or active mobility, or transit. Getting different people who either use transit or interface with transit somehow. They might be an agency provider, they might be a transit planner, but they might be certain people that use transit. So we want to cross-pollinate people that are participating in those focus group sessions.
Yeah.
So I do not believe that we've 100% finalized those participants yet, and we're in the process of doing that right now.
Will that include people from our board or the-
Well, we have different layers, and this is kind of in Heather's board a little bit, but we have different touch points, if you will. We're meeting with you, we're meeting with, there's members like, on the steering committee who either have past representation on boards or current representation. So we have this sort of crossover, but certainly members on the board for historic preservation. Like river corridor commission. Those folks would definitely be targeted for those folks.
Okay, we can talk just a little bit about projects or the steering committee and where we're at with that. As Keith mentioned, we're kind of back on to our original schedule. So this next steering committee meeting is really critical. I think it's going to be really great. So it's on Tuesday, 6 p.m. It's Tuesday, and it's important. The intent of that meeting is really to get into the community character discussion that it's come up many times. So we're gonna assess some of the trends in housing and jobs, some of the data that our sub-consultants prepared, and then we're gonna try to correct it a little bit or get hands-on with some maps with the steering committee on community character. So you can see this kind of mini map right here. That's part of what the 2011 comp plan addressed. You really do have a good chapter 3 in there. The 2011 comp plan, it does a good job of laying out the intent and some of the strategies for these character areas. And you're kind of fortunate in the community to have certain physical barriers and distinctiveness between these areas, those neighborhood boundaries. And so it's really easy to study. So we're going to revisit that 2011 plan. And then we're going to ask what's changed. We're going to test out what that plan said, just as a baseline, put in our own observations with the steering committee, and then ask them if these kinds of character descriptions are still accurate. And whether that's in land use or building types or housing pockets or density, those kinds of things. And make sure that as we come out of this update, that's one of the big things that we consider is what is the urban form and urban character of these areas, downtown expansion, residential, highway centers, there's a whole bunch of and make sure the plan has a good guidebook or roadmap for new stuff that's happening and see what kind of opportunities there are in these different neighborhoods. Think about it more of a grassroots way of looking at it from the ground up, using that original plan. So that's what we're gonna be talking about. That we'll also get recap the growth strategy conversation, because we kind of last time we didn't really get to get into that. We have the new information, so we'll be sure to bring up the PS as well. Busy agenda, but it should be pretty fun. I'm going to hand it over to Heather real quick to talk about engagement and the website.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
All right. Thumbs up. Awesome. Yeah, thanks again. So I just want to talk really briefly about our community outreach, where we've been and where we're headed. What you see up in front of you right now is our website. So our website has been launched for a little over a month or so, and www.visionglenwood.com. We usually repeat this 6 times in a meeting because one hope we have is that you guys are a big cheerleader for us and driving people that are looking for information throughout this process to www.visionglenwood.com. So this platform, very different from your municipal site, is really built to engage the everyday user. So there's a lot of tools on this website platform. right now, primarily it's built for the comprehensive plan. But the idea with Brianna and your communications team is that ultimately more and more projects would be able to populate this site. And a lot of the municipalities in our valley and that we work with are using this. So actually, if you could go to the comprehensive plan update link, Dave, that would be awesome. And I just want to show you kind of one of the first tools that we have, which is called Tag Your Map, or Tag the Map. And so this is a tool where it sits up all the time and basically is a way for folks to engage in a really open-ended fashion. So you can see on the left-hand side, we use some probing questions for folks to kind of dive in and actually engage geographically with ideas that they have or concerns or issues. So this is just one of the tools on the website. We conducted a virtual open house. That was the second week in February. Simultaneously, we were doing a forum. So there was a live forum that was up on www.visionglenwood.com. And so we got some participants that were kind of joining the forum, and they were actually separate from the ones that were doing our virtual open house. So that open house was our community event number 1 in that process diagram that you saw a minute ago. You know, fortunately, unfortunately, we had to go virtual at the time, which is okay. So it was great. It was well attended. We were able to do breakout rooms. We were able to, we were able to dive in pretty deep with the people that were attending. So it was really fantastic. And so a lot of that information gets all tied into our just overall, data that builds the basis for this plan and what we're hearing from the community. So to build on that virtual open house, we have also decided to do some short burn pop-ups. So March 11th through the 25th, we're going to have pop-up stations. So they're basically kind of interactive stations that have information all about the comprehensive plan and ways to engage. Most of that is going to drive everyone back to this website. So our objectives in this early sort of phase of community outreach is very much about building awareness. So first of all, what is the comp plan update? Why does it matter to me? Why should I participate? What happens to my input? All of those good things. We also build our mailing list right now. So when the draft plan comes out, when we're doing our recommendations, when we're advertising for the next community event, we have a really great email list. We're kicking off the website. So both our pop-ups as well as our virtual event, all of the advertising Brianna is doing, really driving people towards this website. And then content-wise, we took the 2021 community survey that was done. We really combed through that and we started to see some key themes. And then we've used those both in the virtual event and then this next kind of pop-up period of time. We're using that as a basis to dig a little bit deeper on a series of our planning elements. So housing, growth, mobility, all of those elements, we're asking more questions of the community in this first. Again, so it builds a lot of themes into the comprehensive plan that are coming from the community. It's not just us coming up with the plan or just the steering committee. It's really coming from the community as well. Keith mentioned it really briefly, but in addition to our pop-ups, our next community event will be on April 20th. And then subsequent, it becomes the draft plan is our third community event, and that'll be scheduled after the April event. If anyone has any questions, someone will probably have to interpret because up until this point, we could only hear Keith and Dave.
What is a pop-up, Heather?
What is a pop-up? That's a great question. When you open the thing and it popped out, Jack in the Box? No, it's not quite like that. It's like when you have a temporary sort of station. So these are going to look like 6-foot tables that have a board on them and some interactive engagement. So there's going to be QR codes that someone can scan. It'll take them directly to the website. There's going to be sticky notes directly on that board. So it sits somewhere, you know, a little like when people sell Girl Scout cookies and their table kind of pops up and there they are selling Girl Scout cookies for 3 hours or for the whole week. And so that's kind of what the pop-up is. It's going to appear in the rec center and the library and City Hall. And so we've got a whole series of places. And in the schools, our first week, we're really going to focus on getting this information into the schools. And associated with the pop-up, if people can't kind of interact right then, we're going to have a little take-home exercise. So it'll essentially be the same information that they might see on the board that's on the table. They can actually take home in a little container and open up at home and engage, you know, back at their house, maybe when they're at their regular computer and not just on their phone, that kind of thing.
Any questions?
The school dates that don't coincide with the spring break. Spring break is,
starts Friday the 18th and that runs out full.
I think the question is, are we looking with spring break?
well, if you want pop-ups in the school.
Yeah, right. I don't know if you can hear, but the comment is that scheduling the pop-ups around not to conflict with spring break with the schools.
Yep, that's right. So we're scheduled for installing on the 11th and we'll take down on the 16th, right before they close for spring break. And then they'll go into some of the other places where people during spring break, like then that same set of pop-ups will go to the library and to the rec center. So some places where you're probably going to see heavier traffic during spring break. So yep, we factored that in, but thanks. It's a great question.
We can come back to a few questions later on. Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Okay, let's talk about both white paper and some of the pieces of it and some of the high outcomes. One of the first things we did, one part of it was to see what everybody's doing out there. So this 6 maps, 5 other communities that were picked, not because they're directly similar to Glenwood Springs, nothing quite the same, but because they all sit on a spectrum of dealing with growth, managing growth with their policies, land use maps in a different way. So Lakewood, Golden, and Lafayette, they all have a policy that essentially caps growth. Obviously, all in the white paper. So just wanted to point out that that's one way that people didn't, communities didn't. Carbondale and Durango have more of a ad hoc, non-regulatory way of doing it themselves. And it just totally depends on the situation, on the geography. If there's other cities nearby, wholly surrounded by county, all these things kind of come into play as to why they did it. But the fact is, all of them had different reasons why they do it, and they all use slightly different tools to install this policy or to implement this policy. Another big takeaway, we spoke with either planning directors and staff for each one of the communities, and it's challenged to administer if you have it depends on how you do it, but really staff time comes up a lot. It's a lot of use, and it totally depends on how you do the allocation of typically, I think these are 1% caps, right? What ended up happening is the developers would kind of all do it at one time of the year for another reason, for one reason or another, and then all of a sudden everybody's slammed for the next couple months trying to administer the program, get permits going. But that was just getting used to a new thing. A lot of these were done recently. Some were done back in the 90s, but that's certainly something that we heard a lot across the board. The other interesting piece is that if you set the 1% cap, it's off, if that's the intent of the policy to hit that cap, typically I don't think any of them actually hit it. I think they're all below that 1%, which is interesting. So you got to take a look at the policy and see how it's performing at that point.
Sorry,
Yeah.
John, is it a cap or a goal?
It's called a cap. It's a good question.
Well, because you just said, you just said,
Yeah.
if their intent was to hit it, they've all fallen short.
Yeah.
Legal
certainly can be interpreted.
To me, it was definitely a cap. And at the end of the year, if the applicants weren't getting their requested for development permitting, they had to wait the next year. So it was physically a cap.
Okay, thanks. And some of them did it by development permit, some did it by building permit. There's a couple different ways. And so they would take 1% typically of the previous year's permit. And then it would be obligated. And some communities did it very complicated. Really tried, they used exceptions for this, that, the other thing, no cap in the urban renewal area. And those are all good ways to deal with it, but certainly more complicated and more resources and time. It takes to kind of get everybody used to it and get working. So
Just one big observation for me when I was part of the 3 phone calls with 3 communities that do it. It was clear to me, hearing from the planners, that be clear as to what you're trying to achieve. That's what the message was that I can get. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to limit growth, or are you trying to direct growth to some place? And it's a big difference. And so that was a big takeaway.
Just to clarify, you have Durango up there. But I was just from reading the report that they didn't have a cap. It was Golden, Lakewood, and Lafayette. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And that's the exact thing to bring up. So yeah, so that was interesting because they also have fairly slow growth in Durango right now, and they're actually trying to encourage them, according to the planning director, because they're so remote, because development costs are so high, and just don't have that people coming in from California to develop there as some of the other cities. They really were trying to do things to incentivize it if they wanted. So they use more of a conventional way. They have a future land use map that describes to everybody where the future vision for growth would occur. They have annexation agreements and policies with the county, and they have design guidelines, which is a really important thing to consider. Basically, at this point, they're really trying to push infill, but they have these design guidelines that do some of the guidance or control of infill there. That's just another mechanism that we can use. And then Carbondale in the same way. Both Carbondale and Durango, they were really driven by personal relationships, and that's how it works for them. The Durango, there's a couple, all local developers, not too unlike up here, where they just have good working relationships with everybody, and they know how to get things done there within the city's vision. So totally, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Like he said, there's many different ways to do it. It doesn't always have to be simple.
You might ask why I didn't select Durango and Carbon, right? It's a fair question. We wanted to make sure that we were looking at least those 3 communities that do have adopted policies. But we also wanted to look at Durango because that was minor there. It's really interesting to me the comparison of Glenwood Springs and Durango. You have similar circumstances. I just walked out in the lobby and looked up at the mesas on there. It's like looking at Durango. But we also included Carbondale. They're in the same market economically, somewhat, right? They're a separate community, we get that. But they have never adopted any kind of growth management strategy at all. And they purposely are conscientious about when they approve projects. That's their de facto sort of growth management.
I see the communities we've selected, and I hear obviously the emphasis being more management of growth, but economically, I don't know that these are the best examples, knowing that there's a good portion of Glenwood that qualifies for the opportunity zone taxation. I don't know that we had any of those other ones, and my understanding is a big surge in some of this development is based on that. So I'm curious if there were communities that also had, strong economies, but also that is a driving force to growth.
I do not know the answer about opportunity zones. We talked about it doing the comprehensive plan for Carbondale to think about that as a strategy, but they do not have it.
Well, because they don't
have the circumstance.
they don't
meet the
have
criteria.
opportunities.
Right.
So
They
I'll
don't.
just throw that in your court. Maybe that's the best way to handle it, is just to say opportunity zone. That's something that I think will have some impact for at least 8 or 7 more years. years on what people are doing. So I'd love to hear if there are communities that are seeing growth comparable to these large developments the way that we are.
Yes.
Okay.
The absolute answer is yes. Ted from Legal Island was here sitting right now. He would say, what you are dealing with is not unique to your physical geography of the Murray Valley. It's not unique to Colorado. It's not unique to the United States. It's amazing what's going on. This backflow of permitted projects all of a sudden were released, and now staffs all over the place are scrambling and granting permits based on approval processes. And it's just happening everywhere. This is absolutely happening everywhere. And the opportunity zone conversation is really interesting. The urban renewal areas are also at play.
Yeah.
And these other communities that we talked with, particularly Golden, Lake Lafayette, they exempted things like affordable housing because they want to promote and not stall affordable housing. And they tried to guide development in these urban growth boundaries or along transit corridors, right? So they were finding that they had to customize their programs to meet whatever their strategy was for that particular community.
If I can, I just texted the former assistant city manager of Lafayette, and they have portions of Lafayette as an opportunity zone.
That's what I was
Oh,
looking
they
for.
do.
Okay.
And two urban renewal areas and opportunities.
We didn't explicitly ask that question, but thank you for bringing it up in our surveys, but it does matter.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you have a slide that shows the table on page 8 with the different densities of population against the cities that you selected? Because,
On the white paper.
yes, from the white paper, it was page 8. Just curious about the density level of Global Springs as compared to some of the other
I
communities,
looked
and
up a few.
why we're so much lower comparatively, even though we're very mid on. It's how it's.
I mean, Lakewood has a lot taller.
Yeah, but Carbondale, for example, we're almost
Yeah.
half the density of Carbondale.
My guess is that we have a large portion of our city limits that actually has such maybe too steep. So of elevations, like the grade is too much. So that I look at that
We have
same
some
thing, it was
large
the same
single
question.
family kind of sprawled out
Yeah.
neighborhoods, but I'm just curious about that density was
Isn't there a city
a
limits that
curiosity for me.
right to the hillside? We don't, do we? Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah, so just kind of a question, and so I'm just curious about insights on that.
Yeah, thank you. Like, I'm not sure I know how to respond. Except,
Okay,
but it is interesting to me when I look at these case studies.
If
Feels
that
like the
presented,
most, when you're looking at density population,
right,
feels like Durango would potentially have the most comparable scenario. Because that's the
Yes.
situations that it's steep slopes and river corridor.
they do, and they're a little broader on the valley floor, but they have taller buildings in their downtown. You know,
Do they? I was down there for a plan for a long time. I think the tallest one is the Strader, which is 4 stories. You have that too here.
Yeah, maybe, I was thinking they might have more.
I think there's another one up North Main, it's 5 stories. But great, you can look at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question, a thought on how that might affect our thoughts on growth.
It was purposeful in their how they make projects, and they have to kind of go through code. I mean, what do you mean, how were they purposeful different from us or somebody else?
The way Janet Buck described it, planning director, was, we don't feel like we have to have a sense of urgency to approve plans. We can go through the process at the pace that we feel is important to make sure that the project meets their goals and values and design standards. So it's a sort of conscientious sort of, we don't really want more growth. We're not going to prevent it. We're not going to do a no growth strategy, but we're going to take the time it takes to actually go through to make sure we get what we want. And then when I was a planner in Durango in the early 2000s, it was exactly the same way.
I am going to interject on the private side that Carbondale feels much like they just simply have the time or the energy. It's not as thoughtful. They're short staffed. If you're on the development side, oftentimes it is 3 weeks to a month before you get a response to either a voicemail or an email. And certainly this community has never operated a community development department that is that slow to respond. Like, you guys would lose your minds if somebody called you and said, I have not heard back from Jen or Hannah in a month. Right? Like, that just wouldn't work here. So while I appreciate that commentary, I can tell you, as it feels from the development community when I go privately up there, it doesn't feel thoughtful and purposeful. It feels like there's just there's no available bodies to provide any level of customer service associated with the project. You might.
They have two people, Janet and an assistant.
Right.
That's it.
And I think if they have a new part-time person, Janet was just reaching out today, that's the thing. Sounds like they may be adding a little bit.
So if we want to slow down, we have to limit your staff.
Well, and actually, I think what
No, you say keep working as hard.
We'll slow down.
I think what it is ignoring those customers when they complain about the speed, right?
Right.
Because, you know, I know I strained myself from calling Dan Richardson and being like, what the heck? But you guys will get those calls.
Yeah.
Just.
Well, Cargill's also got history, you know, where the city market stuff is, they got turned down 2 or 3 times, overridden by the Thousand Boat, got overridden by the voters. Some others, Carmen or some kind of group like that. They had.
Yeah, they were.
For a long time, the idea was they were gonna grow for a long time.
Yeah.
So I guess, but isn't it interesting that they're almost twice as dense as when we?
What, I'm sorry.
Isn't it interesting that they're almost twice as dense as we are?
Yeah.
We have no boundary.
At the time of the 2000 census or 2020 census, though, there was maybe 100 units of lots occupied. And the lots are more like 200 acres, like, not lots, excuse me, the meadows. That whole area is massive as far as acreage. And then there's also the rail yard, there's the interstate, there's 2 rivers, there's Highway 82. I mean, Carbondale basically has 133 going through it. They don't have any of those other industrial geological things.
Yeah, but it's still, density is just the population per square foot, so.
Right, but I think what Jonathan's saying is that in the absence of kind of the rail corridor, Highway 82, the airport,
Yeah.
yeah, 2 rivers. I mean, we have these large, really large areas that are unoccupied for various reasons.
Okay, let's continue on with the other side of the study was to look at just the strategies, 5 strategies that kind of represent a spectrum of the theoretically of how communities can deal with it. I don't think anybody does any one of these, so always kind of a combination. So we took a look at these 5 at a high level. And applied, asked what would happen to a mobility network, what would the impacts to land use and character be, and what would be the impacts to the economic market, the system, everything. So no growth, carrying capacity, which is Golden Lake, Lafayette, where you put some kind of limit on something, and then infill, inward-facing development. So only looking at working within, redevelopment sites, vacant sites in your city, annexation, and then number 5 is doing both balanced and inward and outward, which I guess is realistically what most people are doing.
Just back up. When we were asked to look at the stand service from staff, as Dave said, we looked at the case studies and we were asked to look at this in a way to sort of accelerate this conversation so we can ramp up and go into outlet, right? We were the ones that came up with these 5. You didn't tell us look at these 5. We did. And we wanted to make sure we had the whole spectrum, right? If you absolutely had no more growth, that's the most conservative, all the way through to looking at annexations either in the urban growth boundary or beyond, right? So we came up with these.
So it's annexation being the other side, like whatever growth.
Whatever you're
we're gonna take.
Yes, whatever. If, for instance, let's just say, there was a lot of conversations the last couple of weeks about the presentation that we did at the steering committee when Ted presented a growth model, right? And he had a slide up there that said, if you use the DOLA model, if you use these assumptions, one scenario was not a recommendation. One scenario was you, with your capacity and what you could support right now, a likely scenario is 11,800 population, right? And it raised a lot of eyebrows, right? It was not proposal, it was not suggesting you should go there. It was trying to set the baseline to say, this is how demographers think about these things. To your question, you could, whatever policies you decide, you can be a community of 50,000, 100,000, you can do whatever you want. You just have to adjust your policies to do that. And so we were not at all suggesting, I think kind of got taken out of context a little bit, that that was the direction we are, as consultants are thinking to recommend for you. Absolutely not.
I think maybe part of that is just the language that's used, because it's listed as a capacity limit, as a capacity, and so that does kind of imply that that's based on some type of capacity.
It
that
was,
it's not
totally.
well defined.
Your roads can only accommodate so many vehicles. Your water system can only accommodate. It was based on a limitations that are built in place now. If you want to invest in your water system or your road system and expand that capacity, then that number then rises. It did do that, exactly. It acknowledged that you have limited physical constraints and you have certain capacities for growth now, but you can change that.
And that data that came from, that wasn't coming from like our water department.
No.
No,
This was just a for instance, or if you were to use that strategy to anticipate and manage growth.
Over the next, I believe it was 10-year horizon, they had some guardrails.
Yeah.
okay.
It wasn't just unlimited.
Well,
We typically look at DOLA information, we say, hey, here's your population growth, and you exponentially draw that line out. So Ted explained that. And then he added on this capacity formula, right? He said, if this is true, and this is, we all agree, then you're somewhere in this range if you don't do anything. If you don't adjust your policies.
But that capacity, well, and we need to go into that a little
Yeah.
bit more later, but my understanding just from reading this is that capacity number was based just on historic growth and the trends. It wasn't actually based on our water capability.
No, it was not.
our roads or anything. So that's, I think we have to be really careful about the communication.
I think that's the takeaway from this
Yes.
conversation. We have to do that better, yes, of course. But when you look at those slides, and it's really trying to just lay out 2 or 3 sort of scenarios that we typically would as planners to project.
Right.
What you decide, what you want to do with your community is going to be based on what you hear from the community members, developers, other people, and where you want what your values are. So you're right, that's good, Chris.
And if I may just jump in really quickly, I know that Matt is on one of these focus groups. Thanks, Matt. Because, we want to make sure to have that information about water and some of those kind of things, so that information like that you had this morning.
All right, so these are some high level takeaways. If you think about what policies might do one thing or the other, so kind of these two approaches really is any kind of limit on growth, and then with infill growth overall. As from a land use mobility standpoint, some of the things here are likely going to happen. With limits, the pressure and pricing for housing and home value the pressure would be increased and affordability likely would go down.
So what do you mean when you have that category? What do you mean by growth limitation? You're saying, well, you have population of X, or well, you have X number of units, is that what you're saying? What is that?
This scenario is describing not the no growth, but it could be describing the cap. It could be describing you're not going to annex beyond the city limits, and you're only going to grow within the city limits. And so that's limiting the growth potential.
Okay.
Those 2 scenarios is limiting growth because of these constraints.
And so when that happens, you're limited, you're going to need more people than you already do have now, continuing to fill jobs, and then traffic income inequality where people are just going to push further from their activities for homes. One of the things the case studies said was that when they enacted the policy, it did give them a chance to press pause, or that's what they were hoping to do, was press pause. But that's certainly what everybody would probably like to do, since this is a nationwide growth spurt. But when they did that, what ended up happening is the allocations and permits piled up to one part of the year negotiating. And they were just completely swamped. It was kind of a finger in the dike thing. Looking at more of an infill approach, from an urbanism, land use character standpoint, walkability is, if you apply that to Glenwood Springs, you have a very walkable community with some topographic obviously challenges that we've heard from the community, but generally that's core Main Street downtown. And everything sort of goes to that, and that always comes with infill, obviously. Transit ridership, demand for transit ridership may increase since development is easier to serve. General transportation standpoint, it's safer. People are going slower and traveling shorter distances. All these sort of obvious but important things to consider. But last one, infill design and character becomes critical. If you focus it to inward, then you better really consider what the design and character of the new things or new growth might look like and feel like, and make sure that it's appropriate for your communities and consistent with your community's vision. All the neighbors that are there, which is what we're going to start next week with kids. Just looking at it from a blank slate standpoint.
So last month, there was a lot of information presented to the steering committee. It was probably overwhelming to a lot of people that are not familiar with that kind of information. But what we were trying to do is set the baseline so that we could then have a follow-up conversation coming up next week with the same group of people. And what we would like to do, as Dave was describing, is have do a kind of a present these spectrums of trade-offs. These are really just trade-offs, right? And get folks who are on the steering committee to start providing us more information about preferences. Could Glenwood Springs really entertain a no growth position? Our position is no. When I just ask consultants, our economists, it's probably not likely. But those other four and some blending of those four is on the table for conversation. But we want to hear from the steering committee, and then we want to hear from you.
So when you talk about that, I mean, we're getting feedback that we're going too fast, and I'm just considering what's up, talk about this pressure everywhere, but what's really getting at here, we're losing our small town character. We got to, I'm embellishing now, with public things. And how do you reach those people who have that vision, saying that we stop it, it's going to look like what we did 10 years ago, but how do you say your vision is we don't have enough growth, but what about the people in the community? What is their vision? How do you get a good view of what they're talking about when they talk about no growth?
We do it, we stick to the plan that we have. The plan is we talk with you first. We establish the focus groups, that's a blend of people to talk about these issues as well. So when we first meet with the focus groups, we're going to ask them, what do you love about Glenwood Springs? What concerns you? What keeps you up? We want to have those conversations. We did it. You all did it with your survey last year, right? You identified priorities. Heather's doing it right now with these pop-ups and these events. So it's an amalgamation of all of these different strategies, tactics, and we're pulling all that information together. And we're going to bring it back to you and say, here's what we're hearing. We're not going to try to tweak it. We're not going to manipulate it. We're going to say, this is what we're hearing. And it starts with some basic questions, but it's a layering of the game. I always use that. Dave probably gets sick of me using
I
it.
guess my question is, whether you're saying your view is it should be no growth. So are you projecting that on people?
No.
So they're getting it because they're not getting true feedback. But
No, we're not swaying anyone in these conversations. I said that to you because we're having this conversation.
no, that's fine. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, no, it's fair. No, we do not lead folks. We put it out there. I think that's, again, a baseline of what was hard for a lot of people last week. It was so much information, but you have to start with consistency and the baseline of assumptions going into the next set of conversations. It's just, that's how we do it. Put that information out there, let people think about it. What are the options? What are the trade-offs? And then they talk to us about that.
You adjust those baselines and get feedback from the community.
On the baseline.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's for water, all of a sudden we find out, you know, we have plenty of water. And so that kind of, and I know that's not big enough, but I'm just wondering, as you guys are going through this process for the next year, we walk kind of adjusting that preliminary, here's where you're at. Well, maybe not a year like this, you know?
Yeah, on the water, the expert that we are going to, is the public works department.
Right, right. I'm
They're
just
the ones
saying, I'm more worried about the baseline, not a particular issue. It just seems like the baseline of information. I've watched both things, but the information you presented is going to start to adjust.
Oh, yeah. It's the process is we receive inputs from different sources.
Yeah.
You know, going through the focus groups with some folks who really know what they're talking about. It all kind of gets compiled and Heather speak to how we just put everything into this master spreadsheet basically.
Yeah.
And we'll get thousands of data points. We'll get a ton of data from a ton of different types of people. And as it comes in, it definitely will will be adjusted as we confirm it with the public. You know, we just basically get better questions to ask.
Right. I'm just, I guess, the steering.
Yeah.
Steering.
Exactly.
Do that kind of thing.
Yes, and as we have those different topics, so we might learn a little bit something else about, you know, soils, or something visible, or it could be something different, something not visible. You know, it ends up your zoning affects you, existing zoning affects you this way. It allows this type of building in this place. And then as the analysis goes on, we'll get all the stuff that we get.
And I know that your time with each person who's filling it out, or even the steering committee, is very limited. However, one of my big concerns is that when we're talking to people, we are stressing that this is a document that lasts for approximately 10 years. And in doing so, it has many ebbs and flows economically, sociopolitically. And so with that, I want to remind people that while they may be making a decision or helping create a document that is very timely for right now with, like, we've all agreed, you know, a really strong surge in multifamily and growth and development, I don't want to make decisions right now that won't be sustainable in the event that we have an economically lower time. Because what I actually think, the document that we have right now, that this 2011 comp plan, it was done in the depth of a recession when we had people out of work. And so inevitably we were shaping that document with that vision of, like, we want this, we want more housing, we want all these things. And so I think we can learn from that lesson that maybe we can do a better job of creating a more balanced perspective as we grow, so that it's more sustainable as we move through the 10 years.
Well, and I not to completely disagree with you, but having been involved in the 2011 comp plan,
Yeah.
Part of the reason that it was done at that particular time was because we were in a slow time, and planning department staff had time.
Sure.
There was time to do it. There was
Yeah.
time to spend on it. So I don't know that there was any less focus on what do we want the vision of the city to be.
And that's
There
great.
wasn't a real big, strong, like,
Yeah.
oh, we need to ramp up development. It was more of, this is a time, this is a pause.
Yeah.
And this is a time to look at the community and where are the areas that are most appropriate for growth. And so just having been through that, that's
And
that
I think that
perspective. is
that's,
good.
and I'm glad you said that, but I guess what I was using it for as an example to say, I don't want so much anti-growth sentiment that we have because of some circumstances right now.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want
And I'm
that
agreeing
to
with that.
infiltrate. Okay, great.
I agree, Ingrid, because, you know, how so many of our decisions from a planning standpoint say, is it if in conjunction with the comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
And so let's kind of say something about not just where we are today, but what it's gonna look like for the next, hopefully, 10 years.
Yeah.
And we all know what it's gonna be, because we're brilliant, we can look at that.
Oh, right. Mind readers.
Well, I was just 3 or 4 really brief points. The 2011 was light years ago, because since that pandemic, we know what's going on in Europe is going to affect our economy. So there's going to be ebbs and flows that are unknown going forward. So what we're hearing with the clients, communities that we're working with, is resiliency, adaptability, resiliency from an economic standpoint are really big drivers. Be as flexible as you can, and to Dave's point, I think, is we want to try to shift away from, again, coming up on these projected numbers and go back to the basics and start talking about what do you love about this community or the neighborhoods, and let's keep building on those things. So as an example, we love the downtown. It's walkable, it's diverse, it's great. Maybe on the south side or the west side, it's not quite there. So let's articulate what those great qualities are and emulate it so that when you are looking at projects, whether it's 50 units or 300, you're getting the product you want. That's what we're hearing communities going toward these days.
That's great.
Does it also speak to the needs, like you mentioned, the survey, that you guys kind of use that as a starting point and then working with the steering committees? The survey identified for us, for example, housing as our number one issue. How does that play into this?
It's a huge part because there's affordable housing. We're hearing a lot from a lot of people who want to see a different product type out there. Well, I'm not the expert in that area. I'd be curious to know how we could actually drive markets to get more condominiums and apartments. We need to dig in and look at that because that's what we're hearing from people. Ownership, home ownership is really important. How do you get there? What policies you set up to actually achieve that?
Yes,
It's going to be a little complicated. So
that
we
would
need to
be
look at
very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah.
interested in that.
it.
Yeah.
And in part, mostly it's driven by the market.
Right.
The private sector folks, they're good at what they do. They know what sells. So we have to balance them.
What the plan can do though is make sure that you have a land use framework that supports housing codes, right? So we want to make sure that the, whether it's a future land use map or any kind of other recommended changes to zoning, whatever it may be, want to make sure that that's not holding you up at all for whatever the specific type is that we find out. Ownership, there's a slightly different zone or something that you could do, or some kind of incentive maybe. So we got to make sure that the plan is that all buttoned up once we get the process.
Speaker just mentioned, and just what you just said, I want to follow that. She mentioned this idea that we're building all these apartments now. And of course, some of that's driven because you can't build condos if they were soon. But can we, and what your plans show us, can we somehow try to get those people that are building apartments to put in the infrastructure so 5 and 10 years from now, when all the statute of limitations have passed, that can be more easily converted to homeownership units? Is that something you would be addressing?
Is that appropriate? That's an idea that I've had for a while, but I don't know that it's even appropriate in a comp plan discussion, or maybe it's more appropriate in a code revision.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Or
right.
it's
Thanks.
something
That's what I was
that
trying to
the city
figure
would
out.
incentivize.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
extra cost.
What the plan should do is support that when it comes time to update the land use code and building code.
But at the same time, within a comp plan, you could absolutely say that developments that encourage homeownership will be supported more than those that are
Right.
apartments. I mean,
That's
that's
the
something
criteria.
we
Exactly.
So the community wants.
absolutely.
Let me, perhaps a good example is if there's a property owner that wants to do a project outside, but wants the city services and wants to annex, you establish what the criteria is to accept that. What's the community give back?
So you guys know we're at 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm not
We're
trying to hurry you. I want to make sure you guys get a chance to tell us what you want.
But yeah, we're pretty much through this stuff. So we have a couple more slides and we'll get to just more questions and general stuff. So this is just a snapshot of some of the stuff that's in the detailed report from an economic market standpoint. We've already basically touched on these, but the whole region, the whole world saw an uptake and growth as finally coming out of the post-recession slump. So you can kind of see that evident here in the home values, this uptick. I mean, that's driving the market, which is driving all the applications and ultimately buildings, units themselves. So the question is, what's 2021 an outlier year? So the evidence seems to support that,
Yeah.
right? Because having that happen over and over again just doesn't seem realistic based on market.
Yeah.
Right. Sustainable,
Because,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Outlier here in the value of property.
overall number of, I guess, overall
So,
development
building.
activity,
Okay, thank you.
construction, yes.
Okay,
Yep,
I'm
growth,
looking at your graph.
yeah,
But also market value.
market value, yeah.
I think that we had, I'll just touch on it really quickly since that's my background, and that is that we had limited available inventory because there's not a lot of people who are taking the risk to build a ton of things, especially in areas like this. Then we had the cost of the building materials increase because of a false stimulus of pandemic, like mills shutting down, but then getting back on track and then having high demand. And you also had tax and just admitted like political impacts from changing presidential administrations that impacted taxes. So then you had a ton of people trying to invest, and you had all of these variables happening at the same time. People retiring for the first time because of the pandemic. So all of a sudden you have nothing that you can sell. And then supply demand kicks in.
Absolutely. And
It was an unusual time,
yeah,
Yeah.
but we can predict that something like it will still happen in the future.
right.
There will be another scenario.
Yeah. And there will be another pullback. That's right.
Absolutely.
We, but and also it just reinforces the regional kind of implications of where the whole area is, you know. This map right here, you can kind of see the darker blue is the population in 2002 for your region, and then the lighter blue underneath it is the population in 2019. So those are just kind of proportional growth symbols. And you can see where, you know, where people are, where the population grew.
Can you blow that up a little bit? 'Cause
Got
it's
it,
really
yeah.
hard to see it up in the stuff we got.
Let's see here.
This is an example of the question you were asking earlier. Does the baseline change? I would say no, the baseline doesn't change. This is baseline data. It is this baseline. But what can change is how you approach the future. So I was gonna ask, respond because, the next couple of maps of data, the baseline is trends. It's the data that's in front of us. People might disagree, but it's from our data sources, it's the baseline. So we'll start.
And then finally, the Glenwood Springs used to take on most of the growth in Garfield County historically, and that's seems to go into the way now. So the county, other communities within the county, any other corporate county are taking on all of those units of people, which is kind of interesting.
No, I think it is interesting. We also keep in mind that we go to the regional economic center, and I see some of that moving away, both up and to Aspen and down to Rhineville.
Right.
So those-
Yeah, and again,
That's more to a tax base.
sure. Yep, that can come back to land use as well, you know, for what kind of land use zoning do you have, if things that can support, maybe you go diverse commercial, base. There's, you gotta take a hard look at those things and ask yourself. So this is from a building permit set, just to capture some of the local trends that you probably know about, but we tried to map it, make it visual a little bit. And this is imperfect data. I want to put that caveat. I know we're still kind of going through it, sifting through it, cleaning it up. But we tried to single out the types of building permits that change the physical environment or add an ADU or some kind of secondary unit, or as a new build is anything that adds units, people, mostly in commercial businesses. And so what we found is that this chart on the left, a lot of the permits that come up for vacation rental, so it's a little bit different. It's not direct correlation to a new building or room or something, just the way that's permitted. But really the story here is that in 2010, 2018, you had pretty steady growth in permits. And then that really this last piece was that growth spurt that we saw with. Those are all, it's not, again, not perfect, but I think it's a really good indicator of proportionality in the recent surge. So pretty astonishing, especially when you look at the unit number. And you can kind of see the darker circles on here where some of these permits were located. And so you might have a little older permitting up here in the west part of town. But certainly the core has seen a lot of activity, whether that's, improvements to their home or some kind of real estate improvement, or otherwise that is that in the core.
So 2020, 21, I'm just kind of going back.
Sure.
Anecdotally, everybody in town was stuck at home and redoing their kitchen.
Right, right.
That's not really a new building. So
Yeah.
Is there like a breakout between
Yeah.
2020 and 21?
We tried to eliminate as many of those, like those, because it's got a value on them. So we
Yeah.
tried to sift through some of the lower value ones. But
I was just gonna say, if you go to the next slide, that make people like, oh, this might be.
okay, yeah, this does help you get your mind
Great.
around that. So this, yes, this map just it locates the number of actual units. So red circles are permitted but unbuilt units as of whenever we pull this, it's changing so fast, right? And the green ones are built permits. And so you kind of get an idea of where things are happening. Large multifamily rental projects. And then you can see a couple things here on the low side that some of the folks are trying to take the, with some of the pieces that might be more difficult to develop and make them work. Retaining walls, how it works, but except for all the large multifamily, take those out, take out the inside stuff. There's basically it gets really tough to do it without major investment. But there are still a couple things scattered around. So yeah, it's more accurately reflects that. So
If you took out those big circles, we wouldn't be talking about. We wouldn't have anti-growth sentiment.
we talk about it in a different sense. Yeah.
I just don't think
I
there's.
don't know, I think some of it is, it's still a misconception. We see all this more traffic coming through town. People see that as being growth in town, even though it really isn't. So I'm not sure I agree with 100%.
Well, I think that it's the large projects and the impacts from the large projects that are the impetus behind the no growth sentiment that has risen so much. It's the Bell Ripley, it's the R2s, it's that's what.
On the other hand, some of the stuff out in the meadows, we get very little input. So
Yeah.
they're big population places. So.
They are.
Yeah.
This is the last one. So fine. And going forward, we mentioned PSC is going to be a lot of fun on March 8th. This map you see here, it roughly corresponds. It's just a sketch map. It's not for any purpose, just for us to talk about it. But you see a couple of things going on. The color blocks, those are corresponding to the 2011 complement character areas, but just to show that they do have these sort of nice areas that are easy to kind of put a circle around. But we're going to talk about the three levels of planning jurisdiction that we have. The city boundary, they're flat. The urban growth boundary that we follow is basically what you can service and serve with utilities. And then you have your 3 mile area. So that's
When you do the urban growth boundary, is that we used to call the blue line?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we just call it that. Yeah. So all these things have an effect on how that plus whatever policy we end up moving forward with it from those 5 or from other ones. Revisiting all this at the same time is very critical. But at the meeting, we're gonna assess the 2011 plan. We're gonna review the character strategies that plan has, which some of them are really good. Just have to revalidate them and really ask the questions: what type of neighborhoods, what type of development does the community desire or value right now? So each one of these colors has a different set of land use characteristics or infrastructure characteristics. And each one might help to offer opportunities to reach the vision. One of them might be totally single family, and that's it. And that's the place for that, because that's what that goes. That's what it did. The other one might be more like transitional area or the retail area. And so we want to make sure that we can revisit those and use tools, visual tools, graphic tools, drawing apps, to start to get an idea of what those changes might be. How can we best learn the type of development that needs to be? It's really look at it opportunistically instead of as any kind of negative. Say what can we do? And if it's nothing, then it's nothing. Keep it. And we'll take some of that information in our April 20th penciled in meeting date for our next community workshop. We'll do some of the what we learned. So really quickly, next steps, we're trying to get the existing condition memo with some early ideas and recommendations the next month or two. April, we have pop-up engagement right now in March, as Dan mentioned. A workshop with number 2 at both April, May, and then we're going to try to get the next deliverable that we started with in June. That's the recommendations and strategies. What it's going to do, how is it going to deal with it, and then we'll have community engagement third session in July, August, when we have the plan together and we get folks to respond. The actual plan is it's all together, so it'll be in August.
I know there's another chart. You can come back to see us anywhere before the draft plan, the council.
We should come visit with you as much as you think we need to be here.
I mean,
Yeah, we should. I really do believe the draft recommendations is a critical.
I agree.
Once we, and it takes time to noodle it, right? And the way we're gonna do it is we're gonna look at your 2011 plan and determine what recommendations, what policies carry forward, which are still applicable. And insert new draft recommendations based on what we're hearing. And we've got to work that through with you all. The next step is the actionable plans. Okay, great. Now we have policies. How do we do it? Who's responsible for it? What's the highest and lowest priority? So I think we have 3 touches with you all.
I assume that. I just couldn't remember that other chart.
But you're also taking. So working with Deborah and Jen and others, we kind of came up with a list on the steering committee. And kind of represent kind of different. Who has knowledge and background, kind of, so, just want to make sure that, yes, council for sure, we need those touch points, but also the steering committee can really offer some insight to history. I was watching just recently, and, Sandy went through something in about the, our early history of oil and gas, and that boom bust cycle, and what that's done to our population and stuff like that. So I'm just hoping that our steering committee don't have no one this other than saying that there's some leadership in there on these directions and these, okay, we're doing this next and this next, and we know there's some information in that. That's something that's important to me because I feel a little bit as we kind of come in and show us what's happened. So I'm hoping the steering committee also kind of pushes that direction a little. And that's my opinion. So of course,
What I just heard is that council, as the elected officials and the community leaders, should have a little more say than just getting updates on the comp plan, but actually have an opportunity to interact with the feedback and give our own to make sure that it's aligned with our own vision.
that, sure, yes, we do that. But we also have to rely on the steering committee and carry some of that messaging.
We have to be careful with Deborah and I, but we just gotta be careful not to say, well, this is our vision, and
Right.
you're not listening to
Yeah.
the community. That's
No, I
imbalance. We're
I
trying to get
agree.
to.
Right, and I understand the steering committee's got pretty broad perspective of what people think about it.
Things that they do, yeah, but it's also, there's some good. A lot of public input here, I think the online surveys and, the participation at the workshops is really important. That's where we're figuring.
Is it value to the council to have a council member sitting in on these? I watch them, but it's value to them sitting in and just being a liaison, not necessarily.
That's where we step over that edge.
Yeah.
We become more of a director rather than a listener.
Right.
That's the concern.
One thing, I love the tagging of the map that I just popped in, it's great. I'm wondering, Bree, if there was any way, it's a little like if you're not familiar with the website, it would be a little clunky if we could do like a little video.
I'll just kind of take these from Bree and give them to. Yeah, we do it.
Yeah, a little, maybe like a little video on how to do it. You probably already thought of this, but
That's a great idea.
okay, that would be awesome. Yeah, because I think it's really, it's so helpful.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's great to go in there and just click on some of those pins to see what folks are saying. It's really cool.
Yeah.
So So open for any questions.
And if anyone else wants update flyers to hand out, this is kind of our, in pair with the pop-up events, you know, this is sort of a handout version, similar activity. So we're gonna put these on chairs here tonight. We've got some of the entrances here. We've got codes posted around City Hall. So if anyone has any upcoming community groups that they participate in that they would like a stack of flyers, I'm happy to print them off for you.
Nice.
How are we feeling?
Yeah. Questions?
Yeah, thank you.
And I think again, good. Submitted a couple times now. Yeah, and definitely some very needed clarification that we got out of this today. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. Spelling it out, if you will.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Population limit. We really need to get that message out. That's not anything that anyone should not to be as a big group.
Well, also there's no, it's not really a capacity limit. I mean, I think that communication, what that actually is, it's kind of just based on historical.
Yes, I've worked with Ted the last couple of days to formulate a memo. I don't know if memos are used anymore, it's an email. And our client, you all, that clarifies what we're talking about.
Can the language be changed in the report?
Yeah.
Fine.
Oh, and well,
Yeah.
in the, for sure, fine, yes,
Okay.
we'll clarify that. Yeah, we've posted that slide deck already,
Right.
so it's already out there, right?
Yes.
But what we need to do is be proactive, make sure we're clearly stating what that slide, what I'm trying to put my team is that somebody's gonna look at that slide out of complete out of context. They're gonna look at it as a slide, and they're gonna read it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And not have any sense of what's,
That's when we get phone calls.
And there are things that
and we don't wanna get caught.
the experts and the consultants are telling us that's our cap. I mean,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that we want to be careful about that.
To absolutely, and we appreciate this process.
This is too broad of a question, but it'd be great to have like somebody's perspective of from what other towns have seen, what, you know, what are the benefits of that, you know, that kind of a list, or what are the negatives of infill? I mean, other than, I don't think for me, of course, this is what we hear sometimes, all the time, but I just like if we had some kind of.
There was a chart.
The table
There's
on
a
page
chart,
19.
but maybe something.
Yeah.
I could bring it up. I could bring it up.
White.
But I thought it was
Yeah,
great.
it was, I thought that was
Which one?
a great chart too.
Where page 19.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a
Page
chart
19
that
of
lists the four or five strategies and then.
Oh, yeah, right.
High impact, low impact, or.
19.
19 of the paper itself, it's, what is it in our packet?
Oh, yes.
So this is it, yeah, it's sort of.
Oh,
taking
I do have it. No,
But-
I totally have that, but I was kind of looking for more like anecdotally.
Right.
What we did, because I actually have that breakdown.
Sure, yeah, so if you were to ask somebody how they tell you the conversation with the vendors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah, I mean,
That's a really good piece of information.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really interesting, yeah.
no, it's a great, yeah, I did like that a lot, but I was just kind of looking at, well, here's some, you know, here's some benefits of why you want to do infill, or, hey, we're gonna do all this infill, and you're like, well, what could we possibly face as a result of that? All of a sudden, you can't drive through the alley, or things like that, you know, whatever it is. I think we should just kind of have some of that kind of thing listed out.
Yeah, you can supplement the table by, adding some of that.
I think what we should do is use this as a baseline.
Yeah.
Take it to the steering committee next week and really dig into it.
Yeah,
I think every group that you take this to, whether it be community outreach, and I think this is a great start of the conversation point of what these things mean. You know, I
Yeah.
know, just as a lay person, I wouldn't know what any of these things meant without the context of this. I think this is such a great level set.
And I know it's probably what you can do, but you know, government want, you know, road and things like that. These are some quote unquote people that have influenced the community. And I think more if you get up and present this kind of stuff, they understand it, it's gonna help, kind of dissuade that you guys are directing us to no growth.
So we have this, sorry, any other questions? We have this on the agenda tonight, so what, I guess, just out of curiosity, what is gonna be presented to us, what actions, I mean, it says on the staff report, just presentation, so we're gonna get a condensed version of this.
I think this was just in case you guys wanted to say something formally outside of work session, because there was all the
Like,
anxiety.
stay the course.
Yeah.
Drop these concepts entirely. You're fired. Like, whatever that.
Sometimes happening.
Maybe it's appropriate to use that venue to clarify that one slide.
And that was kind of what we were thinking, and that's televised, and it's also, if you guys, I mean, with that clarification, if you're still comfortable with direction, I think that's good. I do think you're gonna hear from a member, because he's down the hall from me, of the committee, kind of regarding the interaction with the consultants and how they're feeling about that, and so that may be educational as well.
We'll take public feedback and we'll also.
Yeah, and I think at least James was planning on speaking under citizen comments, just to get it out of the way at the beginning, knowing you guys had a long meeting.
I would like to throw out, and we don't have to vote on this, but see how everybody's feeling, and that is that similar to the last time that Mr. Hosmer came in front of us, that we put a limitation, even though he was on a board or commission. Maybe we don't do the typical 3 minutes, but that there is more of an allowed dialogue.
I think he's expecting 3 minutes, because he's a citizen commenting as a member of Parks and Rec.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, he and I talked about it, but like, he's like, I'm just gonna come in under citizen comments and provide input, so. I could tease him too, but you don't want to give him more time.
Yeah, do that. Go ahead and do that.
He's a lawyer.
I did.
That's
That's
what
why
I'm
I'm
like,
saying,
wait a
yeah.
Careful.
No,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
That's a lot of them. Did I?
No,
Did you put up for that?
No, it's great. We need to do this. It's work. Thank you.
Dinner at some point.
Hey, John.